Welcome to the Macro Institute YouTube channel. My name is Ryan Hartung and I'm a member of the research team here. Now before I get into the video, I'm excited to announce that we're going to be bringing more and more content to this channel. So if you like this video, make sure you subscribe and stick around for more. Okay, so as I'm sure you've noticed, the headlines and the stock market have both been incredibly volatile over the last month. It's entertaining and it can honestly be really hard to ignore. But today, I'm going to show you two economic dynamics that we believe would be well worth your time to pay attention to instead. So as I just mentioned, the S&P 500 has been incredibly volatile over the past month. The average daily move in either direction over this period has been 1.14%. There's been a few more down days than up days, but overall, the market has been whipsawing back and forth. It's not just the market either. We're seeing the same dynamic in the news headlines. So you can just take a look at some of these headlines that I grabbed. From day to day, day one is negative, day two is positive, day three is negative. It's a very chaotic period, and instead of spending your days trying to keep track or keep up with this chaotic period, I'm going to give you two dynamics that I think you should be paying attention to instead. So first, we have inflation. There's a bunch of different data series you could use to keep track of inflation. There's CPI, PPI, PCE, you name it, but we prefer the prices paid series from the ISM and the regional Fed banks. It's survey data that can give some early warning signs on inflation trends, which is why we like to use it. As you can see from the chart here, over the past few months, we've seen a large spike in these data series. However you want to track inflation, you should be paying close attention to this. Is this recent spike a sign of things to come, or will inflation be transitory, to use one of Jerome Powell's favorite words, which he recently started using again in some of his speeches? I'm honestly pretty surprised over how it went last time. You'd think he might reach for a different word, but nonetheless. So focus number two, the second dynamic you should be paying attention to are the labor markets. I mean, here there are even more potential data series that you could use to track the health of labor markets. So I'm not even going to try to begin to name them all. But this here is a chart that we've been thinking about a lot. And it sort of shows how complicated the current dynamics are. We currently have more job openings than we do unemployed workers. This is something we've only experienced once or twice. So all the way back to the late 1960s, and before that, it was the early 1950s. Both of those had to do with the Korean War and the Vietnam War. In this case, we're obviously not actively at war. This is more of a demographics issue, we believe. So we have an aging workforce, as well as decreased immigration. So that's why we don't have enough workers to fill the current jobs that are available. It's a really unique backdrop, and as you can see from this chart, it's one that modern investors basically have zero experience with. Flushing out the current labor market dynamics isn't exactly a simple task, but it's still really, really important to think about. So some of you might have guessed this. Why am I telling you to focus on inflation and employment? Well, these are the two main components of the Fed's mandate: maximum employment and stable prices around the 2% inflation goal. So inflation and employment are the two things you should be monitoring to determine if the Fed's next move will be further easing or a return to tightening. There's a trade-off between the two. The Fed raises rates to fight off inflation, but that can also have negative consequences for the labor markets. On the other hand, the Fed might cut rates to help improve labor conditions, but this risks sparking inflation. So there's a back and forth trade-off there. The market was originally expecting further rate cuts this year, but that feeling has since moderated a bit. Since the beginning of the year and even before that, we believe that there's a greater likelihood for a return to hiking rates than the market still does. So if you ask us today, we think hiking is more likely than cuts in the near future. So finally, this slide here sort of just helps explain why figuring out what's next for the Fed is so important for the S&P 500. Since the global financial crisis, the S&P 500's composition has become increasingly concentrated in growth names. Honestly, that's a bit of an understatement. As you can see here, there's been a massive shift. Just on the chart on the left, or the right, both sort of saying the same thing. Before the GFC, 80% of the index's earnings came from cyclical names. That has changed dramatically, and growth is now the dominant force. So what does that mean? This has big implications for the S&P's performance, specifically when it comes to potential Fed tightening. Growth stocks get hit hard by inflation and the increases in interest rates that are required to fight it. So this makes the S&P particularly sensitive to a potential another Fed tightening regime. Okay, to summarize before we wrap up, number one, ignore the noise the best you can. I know it's entertaining. I know it's fun to watch. Stock market going up or down 2% is interesting, but the daily volatility in the stock market and the news is a pretty useless distraction. Number two, focus instead on inflation dynamics and labor dynamics. Why? These two dynamics are important because they'll help you figure out what's next for the Fed. Why do you care about that? Well, that has huge implications for the S&P 500, as the index is now particularly sensitive to Fed tightening. All right, that'll be it for this video. Thanks to everyone who stuck around until the end. If you enjoyed this, feel free to share it, and also don't forget to subscribe. Have a great day, and I'll talk to you guys soon.